So, Jim, what's the core of your program, Radical Collaboration?
What we found is that there are 5 skills that are essential if what you're trying to do is change the culture of an organization to be more collaborative. One is collaborative intention, which is more the mindset. We use something called red zone, green zone. In the green zone, you're much more authentic, much more collaborative, much more present. In the red zone, you're less authentic. You're much more defensive. You get your buttons pushed. So we help people concentrate on staying in the green zone. That's collaborative intention. The second skill is truthfulness, and that's having the ability to create an environment where it's safe enough for people to tell the truth. The third one is self-accountability. That has to do with helping people be aware of all the choices that they're making on a regular basis, because most of us have more choice in our life than we think we do. And then be responsible for both the intended and the unintended consequences of the choices that we do make. The fourth is self-awareness. It's important to increase self-awareness if what you're trying to do is be authentic in relationships. And we focus on helping people better understand what their preferences are in relationships, particularly around 3 behaviors. Inclusion, which has to do with how much you want to be around people. Control, how much you want to influence them. And openness, how much self-disclosure you want.
That's actually FIRO theory?
That's FIRO theory created by Dr. Will Schutz. There's been a lot of research done by Dr. Schutz showing that, in fact, those 3 behaviors play a huge role in relationships, in compatibility and effectiveness in relationships. So we use Dr. Schutz's work to focus on what people's preferences are, and then to help them understand that whatever their preferences are, about 90% of the rest of the world have a different preference. So it helps, we give people some basic tools for dealing with differences. The second part of self-awareness is we help people stay non-defensive. So we have them go in, understand more what defensiveness is about, try to better understand when they get defensive, what triggers them, so they can be aware of it at an earlier stage in the process, and then come up with some action steps. So when they get defensive, they can take these steps and be more and increase their effectiveness. And then the final skill is being able to negotiate your way through conflict, because conflict is inevitable in practically any relationship. So it's to be able to negotiate your way through conflict in a way that supports the relationship rather than undermines it. So those are the 5 skills that are the basis of the program.
Okay. When you say that about negotiations, I understand there are a lot of different courses out in the marketplace about negotiations.
Yeah.
What's the difference between them and Radical Collaboration?
Well, when we first started this program in California, this was a joint project between the state of California and the Hewlett Foundation. When we first started it, we thought that since we were working with such conflicted organizations, that if we just taught them negotiating skills, that would be the key. What we found, though, is that you can teach people the best negotiating process or procedure or system in the world, and if they come to it with a bad attitude or they get defensive and get their buttons pushed and go into their red zone, they're going to screw up any negotiating process. So when we first started out, we were spending about 80% of our time teaching negotiating skills. We've almost reversed that now. So what we do is we work with people to try to get them to be less defensive, more authentic, more in the green zone. So when they use the negotiating process that we teach them, they can do it in a way that's less defensive and more effective. So if organizations are just teaching negotiating skills, they're not teaching, how to stay non-defensive. They're not teaching how to stay in the green zone. Then they're putting a lot of energy into an area that's going to be ineffective, because the negotiating process is just a small part of what it takes to resolve the conflict.
Okay. You're talking about red and green zone. Are there green or red persons, or what does that mean?
There are people, getting defensive is a human condition. In my 25 years as a judge, I was dealing specifically with employment disputes, and I almost never had to deal with legal issues. People were almost always before me because they would get defensive. They'd feel vulnerable, they'd get defensive, and they'd become stupid. All right? They'd move into that red zone. So you're gonna find defensiveness every place. But if you can give people the skills to identify when they're moving into the red zone, when they're getting defensive, and give them a way out, give them an action plan, what they can do is be more centered, they can be more authentic, and they can be more effective in whatever they do. So it's not that a person is a red zone person or a green zone person, but we have a tendency when we become fearful to move into the red zone. When we're feeling skillful and safe, we move into the green zone. So what we're trying to do is give people more skills so they can spend most of their life in the green zone.
So how do we know that this program is effective, if it is?
That's one thing about this. When we started out in California was that we had a huge amount of research showing that, in fact, it was extremely effective when people were concentrating on those 5 skills. In one study that was done by a professor in Mexico, she found that the participants over a 6-year period from 9 different countries were 50% less defensive when they got into conflict, and they were 45% more effective at getting their interests met when they got into conflict. So at a very personal level, it has a big impact. When we studied it in organizations, we were able to reduce the amount of conflict, the amount of litigation that we could measure very clearly before and after. In some groups, it fell as much as 85%. And this was not just 1 or 2 groups. We were dealing with 100 different organizations at that point, and the average for all 100 was 67% reduction in the actual amount of conflict, the amount of litigation, the amount of union grievances, that kind of conflict. Now that saves an organization a huge amount of money. There's also been very thorough studies of over 200 corporations that would be considered red zone or green zone corporations. And the green zone corporations outperformed the red zone corporations over an 11-year period by almost 755%. Their stock price went up almost 800% more in the green zone organizations than the red zone organizations. The number of employees grew almost 250% more in the green zone organizations, so the growth was there. So there's one study after another that shows that if you can use these skills and become more collaborative, it's going to have a powerful impact on the bottom line of any organization, whether that's a corporation or a nonprofit or a government or even just a relationship.
Thank you. You're pretty often in Sweden, aren't you? What are you doing here, Jim?
I love coming to Sweden. We have almost 100 people doing this work in Sweden. The growth here in Sweden has been very dramatic. We've doubled the number of trainers every year for the past several years. So there's a huge number of people who are actually working with organizations in Sweden, and it's fun to see the impact of that spread throughout Sweden. So I do like coming here. I like working with the people that are doing it and seeing the impact that it's having in Sweden.
And on an international level?
We're working in France. We have like 25 trainers in France. We've got trainers in the Netherlands. We've got consultants doing this in Norway, in Finland, in Denmark, in New Zealand, Australia, the United States, Mexico, Canada. So it's a very global process that we're finding, and it's just growing all the time.
Yeah.
In fact, one of the reasons why I keep coming back to Sweden is doing more trainer certification programs.
So thank you very much, Jim, and welcome back.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Thanks.